I think a lot of people assume that because the head's the biggest, especially when they're beginning, that the driver's easiest to hit. So give me a driver because I can't miss this thing. What we're getting at is that only hitting it in the center in the proper space is what matters, right? You need to hit the ball in the center of the face. So when you're swinging a driver, if your body's in the exact same position with a 7-iron and a driver, your club's on the exact same angle, and it's a little bit out of position with a 7-iron, the club's longer. So the club's now more out of position because it's increased the effect. It's like me having bad technique with a slap shot with my stick, and you say, okay, here's a Danos Char stick, now pull it off. Well, I can't because the bad position gets exacerbated by the longer stick.
Everybody got that? When you swing down, if your club's traveling a little out in, if you're swinging a popsicle stick that's 3 inches long, the stick isn't that out of position. If you're swinging a telephone pole, that pole is way out of position.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
And when you go from a 37-inch length 7-iron to a 46-inch length driver, that club is more offline.
Mm-hmm.
Notwithstanding the fact, too, that with less loft, every time there's less loft in your golf club, when you hit a ball with less loft, there's more side spin imparted on the golf ball. So the wedge is really hard to slice because there's so much loft on it that it can't create that much, of a sideways spinning effect.
Yeah, well, think about this for a second, it makes sense. With a pitching wedge, most people are going to have somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 RPMs of backspin. With a driver, we all know how we want little spin, right? You want about 2,600 spin to 3,100 spin, depending on how hard you hit it, for everybody. So if you're only spinning a third of the amount backwards with a driver than a pitching wedge, there's a lot more room to spin sideways.
Yeah.
It physically can't spin as much side, or the axis of spin can't tilt as much with a pitching wedge and have the ball go crooked because it's so busy spinning backwards and it can only spin so much.
You can't slice a wedge. Try to slice a wedge, everybody. If you thin it with the leading edge, you can kind of open the face and have it curve way off. But if you hit it squarely, even if you're cutting across it 8 degrees across your path, which is quite a bit. We see people on our launch monitor, Jake, up to 15 degrees across.
27 yesterday. I had a 27 yesterday. Believe it or not.
27? Really?
Yep.
Did you help him a bit, or did you just fit him into that swing?
No. Of course. It was actually in a lesson. It wasn't even in the club fit.
27 across.
27 across.
Yeah. So think about it, everyone. Neutral path is making that nice little circle around you, and 27 degrees from out to in is really cutting across that ball. But even 5 degrees is enough to hit crooked shots.
Yep. For sure it is.
All right, so let's talk about. So from a club perspective, Jake, when we're fitting people, we're looking at so many things to try to help them out. Shorter club is one thing that can potentially help when so many golfers are hitting from out to in, right?
Yeah.
So many golfers are cutting across the ball due to a little bit of faulty swing that a longer golf club is a little more difficult to square and is a little more out of position. We just said that. So if you have a 46-inch driver, we find often that trimming that down, and what's tour average? Is it 44.5 or 44?
44.5. So for context for everybody, the average driver on the market is between 45 and 3/4 and 46 inches, depending on the company. A few companies are a little lower than that standard, but as a general statement, that's been the standard length for a driver for a long time. On the PGA Tour, the average in the last several years has been 44.5 inches, meaning that their clubs are a 1/4 inch shorter than standard ladies' length on a driver. And the reason the PGA Tour players are doing that is because some of them might lose 1 or 2 mile an hour of club head speed, but it's remarkable a lot of them don't.
Some swing faster.
Yeah. But even if they do lose a mile an hour or two of club head speed, they're hitting the ball more centered more frequently. So they're keeping or improving their distance while making it much more accurate.
Better contact, better ball speed.
And I saw that yesterday. I had a fit with a gentleman yesterday for a driver, and he had a 45 and 3/4 inch driver from before. Same company that we ended up fitting him into later, but with the modern driver cut down 1.25 inches, he hit the ball an average of 15 yards farther in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Because better contact. All of his numbers got better. His launch numbers got better. His spin numbers got better. Every single number across the board improved.
Yeah, I'd like to say, too, that it's not just... I think there's a fallacy out there that if you trim a club, it goes shorter, but it's worth it because you hit it more solidly. And that's the case sometimes, but other times the long club is awkward. if you're not that tall, if you're really cutting across it, if you don't have a ton of strength, the engineering behind the concept that the longer the club is, the farther you hit the ball, the given is that you can hit the middle of the face. If it's long and awkward for you, especially if you think about it, everyone, if we add 2 inches to your 7-iron and you're trying to hit it as consistently, you'd obviously say, well, I don't hit my 4-iron as consistently as my 7-iron. When you're adding length, it's more difficult to hit the center of the face every time. So sometimes it's awkward, and sometimes you'll give a person a shorter club and they swing in better balance with more confidence, and they actually gain club head speed. So I just wanted to say it's not necessarily that trimming a club means shorter but more accurate. It can mean longer, more speed, and more centeredness of hit. And now we go from that 214 in that Golf Digest article up towards that 255 if we're getting the club on a little bit better path, right?
Yeah, so the question, I guess, you alluded to it, but the question is, then why are all these drivers so long? Because I would say a minimum of 50% of the fits I do, we shorten the shaft to some extent, whether it's half an inch to an inch.
Yeah, I know the answer why they're so long. What's
Because
your answer?
if you're in a simulator at an unnamed retail golf store and you hit the ball farther in the simulator once because you happen to get the longer driver nailed right on the screws, you're going to think you hit the ball farther. You're going to buy that driver.
Yeah, I think so. 1 out of 10 times you might Jupiter and Mars might align and you hit it a couple of yards farther.
And we all tend to talk about what we can do, right? Not what we do on average. So if you say, how far do you hit it? And you hit 300 the other day, you go, oh, I can hit a driver 300 yards. Whether you hit, but you might have hit a bunch of them way shorter than that. You're not considering that your average. As a general statement, I guess, I don't know why 46 seems to be the number. Clearly, it's the number where for most people, you then get diminishing returns. Where once you go longer than 46 inches, the average person just can't handle it. So the clubs have decided that 45 3/4 mark or the 46 inch mark
45 and a
maxed it
half
out.
even. It's interesting. Titleist has gone to 45 and a half this year, and they're even calling it speed, right? It's all about speed, TS. But if the driver suits the person at that length, it's speed.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, Titleist sold average is 45. I've fit more 45-inch Titleist drivers so far since the TS came out than I fit 45 and a half. For some people, a little longer is not a bad thing. If you can handle it and you don't hit it worse, a little more length isn't a bad thing for you, but most of the time,
I think it's worth a
better
mention to for the ladies too, that ladies' lengths are even more outrageous relative to their height. I mean,
a lot of the time,
companies are half an inch shorter than the men's length, and a lady's 5'2", and a man might be 6 foot.
Yeah,
that's another place. All right, so number one is we might consider trimming it if it puts us in better balance. If we're off the right path, if we're not in the right path, if we're on the wrong path and really cutting across the golf ball, then trimming it so we can square it easier through impact is probably a good idea.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
Okay, what about the shaft? So we've got, shafts are complicated, right? That's the moving part in the club. You've got flex, you've got twist or torque, you've got weight, you've got where the weight is in the shaft, and you've got flex point, where it flexes. So to think that you could walk into a store or a pro shop and randomly pick the right one with all those variables to create that square hit for that longer hit, I think it probably people are kind of, I hope, nodding in agreement when I say all that. And they're like, yeah, that'd be pretty lucky to have 7 variables, notwithstanding the length, even the grip size and everything about the head, to pick a shaft based on a brand name or based on what your buddy uses or based on what the company happens to put it in as a standard. I think the idea of not getting fit and nailing it is pretty slim. You've got weight, length, stiffness, kick point, and torque.
Especially if you're basing how far you hit it, because what we've already gotten at is that most people, the average man, has the swing speed that would require a stiff shaft. They hit it farther with a stiff, but they buy a regular because they go into wherever they buy their golf club and say I hit a 220. So especially if you're basing it off your distance, add another problem on. If you're not hitting it square, you're not actually getting
there's a great thing to say. I mean, your distance is a little bit relevant, but if you go into a shop and you say, I hit it this far, and they say, here's the club for you, if you're 27 degrees, that's a ridiculous number, but if you're 27 degrees across, how far you hit it's totally irrelevant to what shaft you need, because your club head speed you know, you're very inefficient. So relating the distance you hit it to the shaft you buy is quite something. And I think, once we get people on the teaching tee, Jake, or on the fitting tee, and they hit something a little softer, something a little firmer, something with a higher kick point, lower kick point, something heavier, something lighter, even the change in direction at the top. I think there's another tendency I'm bothered about in golf a little bit, which is lighter is better because you can swing it faster and make the club super light. Well, that's great, but you can't feel that club in transition. So your timing and your rhythm might change. And you might be quick and anxious from the top because the club feels so light that you feel like you got to work a little harder to generate some speed. So
I would agree with that, but I would also say to the credit of a lot of the club manufacturers, the trend is getting heavier again.
Well, and then the other trend is they offer everything. Like,
oh, now they do, yeah. Now they offer one
what's
of every
that shaft in the pings, the
Distanza.
Vistanza, 40 some grams, and then they're all the way up to an
80 gram.
85X,
Yeah.
An 80 gram shaft. So if you get fit, if you take the time to find the right weight for you, the right flex point for you, the right amount of torque, which is kind of feel related to your timing and how you load and unload the golf club. If you just hit a few, you'd be amazed how different they all feel. And I just think people are, you open Golf Digest, there's a giant picture of a ping head there, and it's like Bubba Watson uses this ping head, and you go buy that ping head. But you've got to go through the process of getting fit properly or trying them, And when you're with a pro who can guide you, that one's a little light, let's try this heavier one. This one flexes a little too low, your spin numbers are a little high.
Yeah.
So there's so many variables in the golf shaft.
Lots of variables. And the other thing, just to quickly, I think most people understand this as we're talking about it, but just for clarity, get fit before you buy the club. Because I've had a lot of people walk in for a series of lessons. They just bought their new driver. They're all excited about it. They're like, oh, at some point I want you to fit this to me. It's like, can't do that.
Yeah.
I
might
can
be able to change shaft.
adjust the settings maybe.
Yeah.
But,
Trim it a bit.
I can change the shaft because they got to go buy a new shaft. That's not changing the driver they bought.
Yeah, and if you trim it, you change the swing weight. Many of the companies today, if you custom order a golf club at a certain length, they'll actually change the weighting in the head so it swings properly.
Oh, yeah,
Like
for the
make it a
record,
D3 or...
I'm not saying we can't make the driver closer to right. If you buy a driver, then have someone who knows what they're talking about take a look at it. They can adjust the thing to make it better for you than it is. But that doesn't make it right. That's the point I'm making, is that if you're going to get fit and go through the process, which I agree with you, I find it crazy that people don't, knowing how much of a difference it makes, and you're willing to spend $700 and take a gamble. That makes no sense to me. But if you're going to get fit and you're going to put the time to do that, just make sure you do it before you buy the driver.